Let me put something in front of you that the entire apparatus of Western strategic thinking does not want examined too closely. When the full crushing weight of the most technologically advanced war machine ever assembled by human civilization, every drone, every satellite, every stealth platform, every intelligence asset, every economic lever that Washington and Tel Aviv could pull simultaneously, when all of that is aimed at a single nation, what is the expected result? Every doctrine says the same thing. Submission, disintegration, surrender. That is not opinion. That is the operating assumption baked into decades of American foreign policy, from the Persian Gulf to North Africa to Central Asia. Shock the system hard enough and the system breaks. So answer me this: why is Iran still standing? Do not brush past that question. Sit with it. Because the answer does not just embarrass a few generals and intelligence directors. The answer exposes something far more consequential. It exposes the structural bankruptcy of a model of global power that has been running on momentum and mythology for 30 years. The wall was hit. The wall did not move. And that fact alone changes the geometry of the entire world. Stop counting warheads for a moment. Stop talking about interception rates and sortie numbers. Think like someone who has actually read history rather than just weapons procurement reports. The question was never how much firepower Iran possessed. The question was always what Iran was willing to endure and why. Because there is an iron principle that Washington's strategic class has consistently and catastrophically ignored. A nation that is absolutely clear on what it is fighting for and is prepared to bleed for it without limit will defeat a nation with 10 times its military budget that is fighting for an abstraction it cannot even coherently explain to its own citizens. Iran knew its objective with brutal precision. Survive, hold the strait. Bleed the coalition's political will dry. Demonstrate to every nation on earth that the American military guarantee is a declining asset. Iran did not need a victory parade. Iran needed to still exist. And in this strategic environment, existence is the victory. Now let us get into the structural failure, because this is where the real autopsy gets uncomfortable. The American military machine is built upside down. It is a pyramid balanced on its tip. Overwhelming air power, massive naval projection, minimized ground presence. It is a military engineered for spectacle. It produces footage that looks decisive. It generates press conferences that sound conclusive. What it cannot do, what it has never been able to do, is win a grinding multi-domain war of attrition against a population that has decided it will not be broken. Real wars, wars that actually reshape the map, are wars of exhaustion. They are won by whoever has the cheaper, more flexible, more spiritually committed fighting force. No F-35 has ever matched a human being who genuinely believes that dying in this particular fight means something. Israel compounded this with its own specific and deeply revealing failure. Israel has turned tactical precision into a near religion. The targeting is extraordinary. The execution is technically flawless. But technical flawlessness, in service of strategic incoherence, is just expensive destruction. Strike every nuclear site, and then what? Remove every commander, and then what? Level every missile depot, and then what? The Iranian state is not a headquarters building. It is not a data center. It is not a single individual whose elimination ends the equation. It is a civilization that watched the Greeks come and go, that watched Alexander march in and eventually march out, that absorbed the Mongols and eventually outlasted them, that endured the British and buried their empire. A state that is 76 years old decided it could solve a 4,000-year civilizational equation through precision engineering. History is not an engineering problem. Here is the deepest misreading of all, and it is the one that explains everything else. Washington and Tel Aviv measured capability and completely ignored coherence. They built spreadsheets of missiles and completely ignored meaning. They mapped centrifuges and completely missed culture. There is a concept that determines the outcome of every serious conflict, and it is almost never discussed in mainstream strategic analysis. It is called societal mobilization density. It is the degree to which a population will absorb punishment, absorb loss, absorb humiliation without its social fabric tearing. The American theory of coercive pressure rests on the assumption that enough pain breaks the contract between a population and its government. Make people suffer sufficiently, and they turn inward. They turn against their own leadership. They demand capitulation. This theory has occasionally worked against states with shallow roots and fragile identities. It has never worked against Iran. Not under the Shah's fall, not under the sanctions stranglehold, not under the assassination campaigns that killed its scientists and generals. Not now. Because when ordnance falls on Tehran, Iranians do not experience a crisis of faith in their government. They experience the oldest feeling in their civilizational memory. The foreigners are here again. And that feeling does not produce despair. It produces a cohesion that no weapon system in any arsenal can touch. Apply game theory to this, and the outcome stops looking like an upset and starts looking like an inevitability. America entered this with a linear escalation ladder: airstrikes, then economic strangulation, then leadership decapitation, then collapse, a clean sequential logic. The fatal problem is that Iran never agreed to stand on that ladder. Iran played an entirely different game, a game of calibrated counter-pressure, a game of making each successive rung of American escalation progressively more costly without ever giving Washington the dramatic confrontation it needed to justify the next move. Every American step upward made Iran's response more expensive to absorb. The Strait of Hormuz is not rhetoric. It is the physical choke point through which a substantial fraction of global energy flows, and Iran sits on top of it. Proxies, diplomacy, strategic patience, and the single most devastating move available to any adversary of a democracy, simply not breaking when the other side expected you to break. Israel found itself in an even more exposed position than it understood going in. The entire Israeli military philosophy is constructed around one non-negotiable requirement: the short, decisive campaign. Strike fast, establish deterrence, return to economic normality before the mobilization costs become unsustainable. Israel cannot fight a long war. The population size, the economic structure, the geographic reality all make prolonged conflict existentially dangerous. Iran had studied this not just academically, but obsessively, and Iran executed a strategic masterstroke. It took the foundational requirement of Israeli military doctrine, the need for speed and decisiveness, and transformed it into the primary vulnerability. By refusing to provide the kind of escalation that would justify a clean, decisive strike, and instead maintaining persistent distributed pressure across multiple theaters simultaneously, Iran guaranteed that Israel could never get the conclusive outcome its doctrine required. The war stretched. Domestic pressure inside Israel built. Economic costs mounted. And the narrative that is now the decisive battlefield in every modern conflict, began to shift in ways that could not be reversed. This is the dimension that every conventional military analyst underweights to the point of professional negligence. Wars in the modern information environment are not decided solely by what physically occurs on the ground. They are decided by what populations around the world come to believe is occurring on the ground. America entered this with every narrative advantage. It controlled the dominant media architecture. It had the institutional relationships. It had the moral framing around proliferation and regional stability. It lost the narrative war anyway. It lost it through the accumulating photographic and satellite evidence of civilian infrastructure destruction that the global South did not read as precision targeting. It lost it through the growing visible chasm between what officials stated in briefings and what journalists and open-source intelligence documented in real time. When the narrative fractures, the coalition fractures. When the coalition fractures, the political oxygen feeding the military operation runs out, and military operations without political oxygen do not conclude. They suffocate. The lesson here extends far beyond this conflict, far beyond this region, far beyond this particular inflection point in history. The era in which a dominant state or alliance could reliably impose its preferences on any coherent, motivated, culturally rooted civilization through the application of sufficient military and economic force, that era has ended. Not because the weapons got weaker. The weapons are more destructive than at any prior point in human history. It ended because the conditions that made coercive power reliably decisive have dissolved. Information monopoly is gone. Institutional legitimacy is fractured. Narrative control is contested everywhere simultaneously. Allied unity is increasingly performative. The world is more genuinely multipolar than at any point since the middle of the 20th century. And in a multipolar world, resilience systematically defeats dominance over any time horizon longer than the initial shock. Iran did not prevail because it outgunned America. Iran did not prevail because its technology surpassed Israel's. Iran prevailed because Iran correctly identified the actual game being played while its adversaries were still executing strategies designed for a world that no longer exists. The objective was never to match Western firepower. The objective was to outlast Western political will. And political will in democratic societies, societies subject to electoral cycles and economic pressures and media fatigue, and populations that had no appetite for another generational Middle Eastern conflict, political will is the most exhaustible resource in modern geopolitical competition. America wanted regime transformation. Israel wanted denuclearization. Iran wanted to still exist tomorrow. When those three objectives are run through game theory, through historical precedent, through the lens of civilizational endurance, the outcome carries a logic that should have been apparent from the beginning. The side fighting on its own ground, fighting for its own survival, fighting with the accumulated weight of 4 millennia of civilizational memory behind it, that side possesses an asymmetric advantage that no procurement budget can purchase and no sanctions regime can degrade. It is called will. Unconditional, inexhaustible, historically tempered will. Iran never ran out of it. What you are witnessing is not simply the resolution of one military conflict. You are watching the live recalibration of global power. You are watching the moment when the unipolar assumption, the belief that a single power or a single alliance could permanently enforce its preferences on the rest of civilization through the credible threat of overwhelming force. You are watching that assumption collide with a reality it cannot survive. The global South is watching. China is watching. Russia is watching. Every government that has ever received an ultimatum from Washington is watching. And what they are all seeing with absolute clarity is that it is possible to say no. It is possible to absorb the unthinkable. It is possible to still be standing when the other side's political will collapses first, provided your society holds. Provided you know precisely what you are fighting for, and provided you have the patience to let time work in your favor. Empires do not collapse in a single afternoon, but the pattern of their collapse is strikingly consistent across every century and every civilization that has ever produced one. They overextend beyond what their political will can sustain. They catastrophically misread the depth of their adversaries. They mistake the possession of superior technology for the possession of superior strategy. They confuse the demonstrated ability to inflict enormous punishment with the actual ability to achieve defined political objectives. And eventually, without exception, they encounter a civilization that will not break regardless of the cost. And in that encounter, something shifts. Something in the fundamental architecture of global power shifts. And once it has shifted, it does not shift back.